There you go. Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight series, a show that explores innovative topics and organizations in the world of international higher education. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, and I'm very excited to be bringing you today's topic. So here's the thing. When you think of cryptocurrency or blockchain, you might think of celebrity or athlete NFTs, overnight dogecoin billionaires, or perhaps you don't know what to think about the world of blockchain technology. So in this episode of the Gateway Spotlight, we're demystifying the cryptocurrency world with Matthew Hightower. He's the CEO of Class2Class and a crypto enthusiast who's going to school us today on all things blockchain. We're going to discuss the history of blockchain and crypto, how social tokens could democratize the global economy, how international educators could tap into the creator community, which is an interesting one, and the creative ways Class2Class is bringing blockchain to our field. Of course, we can't talk about crypto without talking about some of the key concerns and challenges that come up with Web 3.0, and we're going to dive all into that with Matt today. So without further ado, let's get started. So introducing today's guest is Matt Hightower, but before we dive into that, I just want to ask anybody watching live, and I'm sure people are filing in now, I want you to tell us in the chat, give us a 1 to 5 Likert scale result about your knowledge of blockchain. So are you a 1 where you don't know anything? That's why you're here. You need to get schooled on this. Or are you a 5? Could you write your own dissertation about blockchain and crypto? And you should be the guest on the show with Matt. So give us in the chat where you are. And of course, as we have this conversation, add your comments and questions to the chat, and we'll dive into those at the end if we have time. So welcome to the show, Matt. I want to formally introduce you to everyone. Matthew Hightower is currently the CEO and founder of Class2Class. It's one of the largest collaboration and partnership networks in global education. He works with stakeholders such as university presidents, administrators, students, edtech startups, research organizations from 707 universities in 78 different countries to continue to innovate and bring value to the global education community. He studied business and leadership at Texas A&M and was an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Hawaii Manoa. That's not a bad gig. No. He's delivered talks and workshops worldwide on topics such as future of education, virtual exchange, startups, AI, and platform businesses. And now he's schooling us all on crypto. So thanks for being on the show, Matt.
I really appreciate it, Brooke. Yeah, really excited to be here and kind of explain what I know about Web 3.0 to this community and get some valuable feedback and see kind of where we go from here. It'll be fun.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting too for us to get clear on the terminology as well, because I've been using blockchain and crypto interchangeably, and they're not the same as well as Web3. So I'm going to be educated on this as well today. I've been doing lots of studying because I don't know much about it. But I also have to thank Class2Class for sponsoring today's episode of the podcast as well. So before we dive into the great world of blockchain and Web3, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your international education story? What was one of your first meaningful intercultural or global experiences, and how did it inform sort of your evolution to leading you to founding Class2Class?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I guess it all started in college. I was fortunate enough to be recruited by Texas A&M to be on their track and field team, which was the #1 track and field team in the nation at the time, where I threw the javelin. And so on that team, why it was one of the best in the nation is that there were a whole bunch of individuals from different countries on the team. And so I got to meet people from Ghana, the UK, France, Ukraine, Norway, and it was really an eye-opening experience for me, kind of being, someone who lived in New Mexico, kind of growing up. I lived a little bit of time in Austin and then went to College Station. And so I hadn't really had a global experience, traveled overseas, what have you. So meeting those individuals was very impactful, learned about different cultures, learned that I was interested in learning about different languages and those kinds of things. So through that experience, I actually became the president of the international student government at Texas A&M. I was
Oh,
voted in by
cool.
the international students to kind of represent them at the university. And so it was through that I had a lot of interactions with senior international officers, global engagement officers, other sorts of instructors that were interested in trying to internationalize the campus. And I was also interested in technology and startups. It was kind of the first year that my university had an accelerator, so I joined that and tried to start companies. So naturally, I just kind of gravitated towards, hey, how are we helping every student on campus gain a global learning experience? And what I realized is that the senior international officers were really gung-ho about sending students on study abroad. But I realized a lot of students couldn't afford to, didn't have the time, resources, what have you, in order to do that. And so what were we, and I realized through my research that less than 3% of students could actually, afford to do study abroad. So I was wondering, what are we doing for the other 97%, right, of students? And this is what kind of got me towards thinking about how comprehensive internationalization was a big thing, or internationalization at home, it's used in Europe, was kind of gaining traction at this time. So I built a little app with my first co-founder to just connect a few instructors at Texas A&M to a few instructors overseas. So it was a Japanese instructor and a German instructor at Texas A&M to their counterparts in Germany and Japan, to create, just add on kind of some collaborative components to their already existing courses and connect the students together. And it was through that I gave a presentation, South by Southwest EDU here in Austin, where I'm located currently, and was approached by Julio Rodriguez, who is in charge of the Technology Innovation Center at the University of Hawaii. And he said, what you're doing is called, collaborative online international learning or virtual exchange. There's still a lot of problems in this space. Finding partners, how to build out these collaborative courses, how to connect these students, how to gather data around it, how to take all these different tools that these instructors are using and put it in one place, how to connect it with the learning management systems, these kinds of things. And so I did an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Hawaii, got to work with very intelligent people from all around the world on how to kind of build out a platform. And then we received some initial funding from a university in Japan to kind of expand that platform. And since then, we, as you mentioned, kind of the introduction of the company, we have over 3,000 instructors from 707 universities in 78 countries working on the platform to build out these collaborative components to their already existing courses and connect their students together so they can have a global experience. And yeah, it's been very exciting and very fortunate that I'm doing this work.
No, that is a really cool evolution. So I'm just curious, what was the time frame from that first app idea and that talk at South by Southwest to getting like the class to class that we know today out to market?
Yeah, so the initial idea started kind of May 2017. We didn't really have kind of an app finished till I would say 2018. And then did some initial kind of pilots throughout the fall and spring of 2019. And then, of 2018, and then did kind of the entrepreneur in residence 2019. And then kind of finished kind of building out the platform as it is today. Obviously, we made a lot of iterations, right? So I can't really say that, but the foundation of it, kind of late 2019, early 2020. And so, yeah, it's only been a few years, but 5 or 6 in terms of having the idea and trying to help universities kind of internationalize their campus, if you will, through these virtual exchanges.
Well, it's so interesting. Obviously, COIL's been around for a while. I mean, but I think, obviously pre-pandemic, it was sort of, I feel like in education abroad, for instance, it was sort of that, it's like reentry programming. It'd be nice to have, but we don't have time to actually devote to it. And then once we're all thrust into the deep end of the pool going, we're going to have to prioritize this. I feel like our field in general is still figuring out, like, what are the best practices? What are the best tools? Like, how do you structure these types of experiences? I'm working with faculty here at Johnson County Community College on that same challenge of taking our faculty who've been doing this a lot, experimented a lot, and figuring out how we can create a framework that we can share with all faculty so that they can leverage that experience and not have to make some of the same, early adopter mistakes. I'm
Absolutely.
curious, and we're going to get into crypto, I promise, but he got me excited because I'm
Yeah.
very much in the deep end of this virtual exchange stuff right now myself.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I'm curious, have you, through all these faculty who are engaging on the platform, have you guys started, and by the way, I'm totally springing this question on Matt, by the way. So, have you figured out any kind of core best practices or frameworks that you feel like you've seen work almost universally across the board in terms of how faculty can approach doing virtual exchange, especially using a
Yeah.
platform like yours?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think that's a great question, right? Because as you said, a lot more administrators are becoming interested in it. How do we adopt virtual exchange or do collaborative online international learning and add it to our kind of internationalization toolkit, if you will? And that's how it should be viewed, right? Like study abroad has its place, and so does some of these other things, but virtual exchange should have its place in helping improve the internationalization on campus, which I believe is every senior international officer or global engagement officer's kind of goal. But kind of to your point, I want to make sure that I'm clear that as a company, my job is to hire very smart kind of engineers and stuff to build out the platform. We are content experts or experts in kind of this field, but what we've done is partnered with the COIL and virtual exchange experts in certain locations in the world, right? So the SUNY organization is kind of the grandfather of the collaborative online international learning movement. So we partnered with them to learn as much as we could from them on how do we scale these courses, right? How do we build out the technology to help facilitate them better, build out certain templates, these kinds of things. In Japan, it's the Institute for Innovative Global Education out of Kansai University. They're doing, great work in the Asia Pacific region on kind of leading how other universities can adopt virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning. You have uni collaborations in Europe. So our role is to kind of work with those organizations to make sure that we support them so that we can support the movement. So when it comes to experts in this space, those are them, and we're here to kind of support them. But to your point, like we've seen certain lessons and activities, right? Like icebreaker activities, just to kind of get the students to communicate with one another and feel kind of connected in a certain number of ways before you dive into like actual lessons and activities, which maybe might seem common sense, but a lot of instructors in the beginning are like, all right, well, let's have our students work on a project. And it's like, they don't even know each other. Like there needs to be like a period
warming
of
up period.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then there's a few kind of lessons and activities centered around understanding the different cultures and languages and communication methods, right? High context, low context communication, depending on where you're working, who you're working with in the world. And then it again depends on really the discipline. And this is what I'm the most excited about, right? Is that we've had instructors of the same discipline, like let's take science, for example, connect with one another, and they want their students to discuss or do lessons and activities around biology, right? And they're all learning it at the same time. So it's a way to just reinforce learning, teach someone else, learn about something new. And then there's kind of these multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary projects, right? We had one where a university in Florida and university in Mexico worked together. And there were students in the engineering department and the students in the astrophysics department. And the instructors created a project where the engineering students built a database using Python for the astrophysics students who were tracking comets all around the universe for Mexico's equivalent of our NASA. And then they presented that, as like hey, this is what we did for you. We created a database that tracks these comets, for the government. It's like, wow, that is a really cool project. So kind of the sky's the limit in terms of what kind of projects kind of can unfold here and what instructors come up with. And as a platform, we just try to facilitate the connection. We try to make it easy for them to bring in their tools. And then we try to give them a little bit of support by connecting to our partners when it comes to professional development or how to scaffold and build out these courses.
That's really cool. That's awesome. All right. We're done talking about class to class, but maybe we'll do another episode where we dive deeper into that. That'd be really cool. But let's talk about blockchain, because that's what everybody's here for. So for those of the people, if you joined us late, let us know in the chat, 1 to 5 on that scale. 1 being, nothing about blockchain or crypto, and 5 being your expert level. You're ready to write your dissertation about it. We just want to know who's in the room. So a few people we had, mostly on the 1 side, 2 side of the scale. 1 person is a 3, another one's coming in. So everyone's kind of at that beginner stage, at least the people who are not shy. So why don't you give us the foundational crash course on Web3 and maybe define some of these terms we keep throwing around as we go as well. So take it away.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, Brooke. Yeah, so I think probably the easiest place to start, or whenever I was coming up with how to frame this to begin with, the easiest place for me to understand this is to, make it very clear kind of the terminologies and kind of go back to the history of the internet so that people can see how this is more of like an evolution to what has already existed and how this is being built on top of the internet already. So to do that, we'll go back to what is referred to as Web 1.0. And this is the beginning of the internet, if you will. And these are just basic websites, right? Like recipe websites or wikis, blogs. And, most people are consumers in the beginning of the internet. There's only a few people that are putting out blogs and websites and stuff because no one really knew how to monetize it or what was going on. And it was a new medium, right? And so from that lasted till about 2001. And in 2001, what was happening is a whole bunch of startups were raising ungodly amounts of money just because people were clicking on their blog, right? 1 million people came to my blog, I could raise a ton of money. But what became apparent in 2001 is like, how are you actually going to monetize, and like what was happening? And so there was what's referred to as the dot-com bubble, right? And when that kind of burst, it kind of brought in a different web. We kind of transitioned to Web 2.0. Yeah, there was some Web 1.0 companies that survived, but a lot of them died. It was kind of a bubble. And so in Web 2.0, they tried to take, okay, well, what went wrong with Web 1.0? Well, just having people click on a website and view it is not much you can do there in terms of like adding value or monetizing on it. So how do we build community, right, on the internet? How do we build something that has engagement, that people want to log into, they'll want to interact with one another? It's not just a static page, it's like an actual portal to like an online community, right? So take our communities in the physical space and put it in the digital space. And this was, kind of the highlight here is user-generated content. Usability became a big deal. How do we make websites kind of sexier, if you will, easier to use? And then interoperability became a big thing. How do we connect, through APIs, application protocol interfaces, other applications, bring them in, make it easier for people to use the internet, right? And this is where your Facebooks and your Instagrams and your MySpaces and everything kind of came about.
Yeah.
And so, and this has been going on for a while. And then what ended up happening is I would classify, there's kind of 2 things. There's the economic and the social. And in 2009, there was an economic kind of crash, right? So the housing bubble and everything else. And what a lot of people believed kind of caused this was the lack of transparency and these centralized, huge corporations or governments having control over certain amounts of information, currency, making it difficult for us to share our own currency or gain access to it. Why does the bank take 3 days to transfer my money to my other account, right? Like, does that have to be the case? Is there an easier way to do this? How do we avoid these central entities being kind of this main point of vulnerability when it comes to security? If someone hacks into Citibank, they can steal all the information from Citibank. It's just sitting there in a central location. Obviously, they try to create, ways where, they can keep bad actors out, but it's central, it's control-wise. And then if you look on to the social aspects, these platforms have been exploiting us for a number of years, right? Facebook says, it's nice that it's free, right? And you're welcome, but it's free. It's because you're the product. you're creating all of the content that makes Facebook Facebook, right? You're creating the posts, you're sending in the pictures, you're chatting with your friends. If Facebook was to, be disbanded, like let's say the government comes out and says no more Facebook, you lose all of that because Facebook owned it. Facebook sells it, right, to gain for their profit. So they're selling your data, they control everything that you've created. And the internet just is, the people who are using the internet are just not happy with that, right? And so here's where Web 3.0 kind of comes into play, is it's taking Web 2.0, where this is like centralized governments and corporations and exploiting data and not good security. And it's like, how do we build something better? And how do we incentivize people and give them money for contributing? Right. And so this is, in Web 3.0, it's decentralized. There's multiple nodes or computers, which I can kind of go into in a bit when I talk about blockchain, and that make it more secure, right? So that a hacker can't just hack into one centralized location and take all of your information. Then when it comes to platforms and the social aspects, I mean, this is a world where we can incentivize people. If you come onto our platform, right, and you bring us value so that you're attracting other people that'll come into the community and you're bringing them value, you can receive social currency for this that you can then trade in for real money or trade in for other goods and services. So this is really the beginning of the creator community, taking the power from these centralized huge corporations that are making ungodly amounts of money off the backs of our user-generated content and putting the power back into the people and allowing them to make money off of their own content. And this is exciting to me, right? And so that's Web 3.0 from like an ideological standpoint. And underneath that, you have certain technologies, as you mentioned. You have blockchain or non-fungible tokens, which most people refer to as NFTs, right? You have social tokens, which are governance tokens and utility tokens, which we can talk about. And then you have decentralized autonomous organizations. So just for kind of sake of time and aspects, I'm going to hit at a very high level on these certain technologies.
Because I feel like this is the stage. I'm just going to pause for a second. I feel like now I feel like, okay, I'm tracking. Who's here? Raise your hand. You're like, okay, following. And now you mentioned, blockchain, the tokens, the crypto, all those things. I was like, okay, now we're getting out of my realm of understanding.
Now it's getting hairy, right?
Now it's getting real. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
but no, I mean, these words shouldn't scare people. In fact, if you look at it in like the problems it's solving or why it's created, it makes sense. So blockchain is like the technical definition, or how you would describe it. It's a digital, distributed, decentralized public ledger. Oh my God. Really what it means is, like, instead of class to class, right, we have a server, that's ours, right? And so everyone logs in and we manage that server. Instead of that being the case, there are different nodes on this network, right? Different computers that are basically acting as these different databases, if you will. And so if someone hacks into, let's say, my database, right, and tries to manipulate some things, what ends up happening is, through the blockchain, these different nodes kind of check the same information, like, hey, does this, make sense here? Does it make sense here? And if there's ever a point where it's like, hey, I have something that this other computer, this other node has differently, it kind of shuts down the network, or it goes, wait a minute, there must be something wrong. And so it's just a way for security, making it so that not one central entity is like in charge of everyone's data. Mm-hmm. It also makes it so that if class to class fails tomorrow, technically the platform still works, like the community is still kind of using it, right?
So another way to look at it is sort of like a carbon copy. It's like you kind of created a duplicate elsewhere, and then if somebody tried to manipulate it, they could go back and be like, actually, my version of this carbon, like I think of like the triplicate forms that used to exist, it's like, well, mine says it was a 1, you said it was a 100, and there's something wrong there. Okay, I'm tracking. Got it.
And so on top of this, right, this technology, you have different kind of components to it, right? Your non-fungible tokens is what I'll get into next, right? Yeah. And what that means is, it's just a digital asset that can be owned and tracked on this blockchain, right? It's given a unique identifier that says, hey, I own this, right? It's given, think of just like a URL at like a website. it's given that. And so I can trade it or give it to someone else, and it has that kind of signature in it in the code. So people know like that this is the only picture, right? People are sending pictures of like apes and stuff on the internet, right? As you were talking about, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But really they're doing this, I would look at it, at least to this community, is like, these are just early adopters having fun and they don't know what they're doing. And even if you talk to the experts in the space, they're like, really, the reason why Web 3.0 is even a talking piece is because of NFTs? Like, that's embarrassing. But it just allows people to like, create a JPEG, if you will, of a unique instance in which you took a picture of me right here. And I could then put a little unique identifier to it, put it on this blockchain, and you could buy it for $5. And then someone else could say, oh, I want to buy it for $10 because it's unique and no one else can, it's non-fungible, right? It can't be reproduced.
Can I ask about that though?
Yeah,
Here's my thing. And I apologize to the audience if y'all are way ahead of me and you're keeping up with this better. But I think of that example you gave. Let's say I know that Patrick Mahomes, he's the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, which is where I live. And so he's kind of well known. And he was selling NFTs of like art of specific plays or passes, I think, that he had done in his career. And for me, I'm like, well, couldn't I just go onto my computer and take a screenshot of it and now I have it? Like what's the, I guess I don't understand the value of the digital component.
For sure. I mean, the easiest way to look at it is, I mean, it's being used as art, right? It's being, so it's like anyone can, maybe a really good artist can reproduce the Mona Lisa, right? Okay. But is it the Mona Lisa? Like there's only one. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, it looks the same. So why don't you have replicas of all these Mona Lisas all around people's homes, and they, show off visitors that come over and say, hey, look at this. Like the first thing they're going to say is like, well, is that the original? Right. Like it's not real. So it really, I mean, I get where you're coming from, and I'm kind of in your same boat here. It's like, do I care? No, but the technology underlining it is really cool because it's starting off with weird pictures and art and stuff, right? But it can be where, let's take the education space as an example.
Please do.
We can create, let's say, a lesson or activity, right? And you can put a unique identifier to it. You can track it, and you can see all the people that have purchased it, all the people, the dollar amount can go up. You can, through the blockchain, we can make the transaction through smart contracts, right? Instantaneous. So instead of there being a third party that like a Venmo or a Wells Fargo bank that has to go through multiple days of sending you your money, it can be instantaneous, right? It's automated. You're removing individuals and entities from you trading and selling and receiving your money. And this is how, when I say empowering the creative community, this is what I mean, is like, we don't need all these entities, telling me when I can pull my money out, where I can use it, or how often I can get it. I can do this myself. I don't need other entities to allow me to sell my lessons and activities and these kinds of things. I can put it on a decentralized network. I can put a value to it. I can track it. I can do it myself, and I can receive money from it.
Well, to that point, but there still has to be some kind of third party, because I'm getting ads for all of the, like, download this app so you can manage your crypto, or download, log on to this platform so that you can access basically the Web3 ecosystem in some capacity. So there is still, I think, an element of third parties that has to exist, because otherwise I'd be like, well, where do I go? Like, how do I make the transaction? Like how do I actually do it? And so what's the value add for, and we're going way off the list of questions here, but what's the upside for those organizations? Are they still going to kind of be acting like a Wells Fargo in some instances?
Yeah, to some extent. So, I mean, in this space, right, which is evolving every single day, like there's just new stuff. There are central entities and then decentralized entities, or more decentralized entities. So I think this kind of segues nicely into what a decentralized autonomous organization is, right? And that can be built on a blockchain. And what that is basically think of it as a grocery co-op model, where and it's a community with a bank account. So on top of a blockchain, let's use Ethereum as a big one. We have Bitcoin, Ethereum are kind of the two parent ones. You can create, a social token, right? And you can create a governance token or utility token. A governance token is a token, think of it as like if a company was raising money, either on the stock exchange or as a startup, this is a token that the company can create that other people who are interested in their idea. So let's say that we're creating an international education ecosystem, right? And Class2Class wants to be a part of it, but I want other companies a part of it. I want administrators. I want this to be for the community. So if something happens to Class2Class, like the community still kind of owns it, right? And so let's say by doing that, I'm selling shares in this new decentralized autonomous organization, right? This DAO is what it's referred to. And so people can buy in, to invest in this new organization. And through the amount of money that they buy or tokens that they purchase, they'll have a certain amount of kind of voting shares, right? So they'll get to say what happens with this new economy that we're creating in this digital space, and what new features are maybe built, and what new things are prioritized. And so through this model, it's very decentralized in a lot of ways. And it's very equitable in a lot of ways too, which I know one of the big things that you want to hit on is equitability. And so in my world, being kind of operating as a startup, what I've realized is very unequitable, in my opinion, is only the wealthy get to actually invest in startups or a vehicle, right, that can produce ridiculous returns. Normal people can't, right? And so, for example, the government says if you don't have $1 million, right, in your bank account, or you make over $300,000 a year, you can't invest in a private startup company. But you might have expert knowledge in the international education space. You might be better at investing in my company than someone who has $1 million in the bank account. But according to the government, you're not smart enough, right? You can't do that with your money. Mm-hmm. And so that to me is unequitable and unfair. So only rich people can get richer, mm-hmm. but you have to put your money in the stock market and hope for 12% returns. And that's if things go well. And so through this decentralized or this DAO network, you can have the opportunity to invest in startups. You can have a piece of the pie. You can be a part of, these ridiculous upside returns. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a better internet. That's a better future. That's more democratized. Mm-hmm. I don't have a government telling me what I can and can't do in terms of where I want to put my money. And so, to your question, there's more central entities that operate, as you mentioned, where there's a little bit more control. But when things are built on the blockchain, you can always take it off and take it somewhere else. That's the important thing to keep in mind. It's not like Facebook where everything's stuck there and I can't pull my pictures off and take it places like Facebook owns it. It's like, if I'm like, hey, I want to take my pictures from Facebook and I'll move it over to this other platform, you can easily do it, right? Mm-hmm. So it might be a central entity, but you still have the ability to move it around. Yeah, sorry to kind of go off on a tangent.
No,
there.
that was good.
I
want to be cognizant of time, but I'm just going to tell the audience, if you have to go, we will have a recording available on Gateway's website plus the YouTube channel. So we'll be emailing out the link, but I want to keep the conversation going because I feel like there's still more to cover. And so if you have to sign off, thank you for attending. And Matt, if you have a few more minutes, we'll keep going. Yeah. I guess I want to come back to some of the challenges or critiques of this. Like you mentioned the equity issue. But before we do that, I want to talk more about like other use cases that we can relate to as international educators and the work that we do. You mentioned like the ability, I don't have $1 million in the bank, but I know a lot about international ed. I'd love to be able to invest in Class2Class, those type, what you just mentioned. It's like a really interesting idea. Obviously that could span a lot of different industries depending on your expertise area, but what are some other cases? I'd love to maybe tack or get your perspective on like, do we need our own cryptocurrency and what does that even mean? Or do we just need to be doing Ethereum deals and instead of, buying currency and trying to trade on like currency changes and stuff. So what are your thoughts on us needing our own, i.e. crypto?
Perfect. No, I mean, it's a great question. And so, when it comes to these social tokens, I mentioned there's the governance one where you can like raise money with it, right? And put into account. The other one is utility token. And that to me has the highest upside and potential in this space. And what a utility token is think of it as like whenever do you have any games that you've downloaded on your phone or any games that you play? Like they incentivize you when you get to a new level, you can earn some, new things, right? And you can trade in those new things for fancy new objects. Well, what a utility token is it's basically a currency that operates within, it can be a DAO or a more centralized location, but it operates on the blockchain and it incentivizes and rewards users for doing certain actions, right? So let's say we wanted to create this international education ecosystem and we created as a DOA, right? And you have a lot of voting rights. You put in some money. Like, hey, Matt, all of these international education administrators are interested in partnerships with other universities. So we should give out a portion of this kind of utility coin every single time a administrator connects with another administrator and they sign an MOU, right? Or an MOA. It's like, okay, cool. I agree. Let's do that. So let's say the community adopts that, right? Let's say the community adopts where, hey, Matt, we want to incentivize users to communicate with their peers, overseas more often to build out these virtual exchanges. Okay, well, we'll give them a token every single time they build out one of these exchanges. So then what ends up happening is these administrators and instructors, depending on what kind of things that we lay out as a community or as an organization deem as bringing us value, then they can trade these in for goods and services. And if we create this economy where we're bringing in study abroad providers, virtual internship providers, big curriculum providers, and we're saying, hey, we work out a deal, 20, international education coins will make it so that we can purchase, a few seats for our students. So we can actually, do that. And we don't have to go through our university to approve it. We don't have to go through all these different kinds of things. And these businesses want to be a part of this ecosystem because the engagement of this community. Now we have thousands of these administrators and stuff that are on here sharing content, doing all this. They want access to that. They want to be a part of the community, and they'll be incentivized by kind of reaching out to these different universities and getting stuff kind of purchased and stuff through this ecosystem. And then, so look at it as like airline miles in the beginning. Right? Like you can earn airline miles that you can redeem for other goods and services within this community. But then, the long-term play here is it's built on top of, let's say this utility coin was built on top of like Ethereum, which is a blockchain. You could trade that in this digital space for like one of the IE coins equals one Ethereum one day, and then you trade in for Ethereum, then you can trade in for USD, now you have cash. So I think one of the easiest places to start for the international education space is, one, how do we kind of come together and create this ecosystem, right? Where it's vendors and universities and we're working together and instructors. If you're interested in international education, here's the community for you. We're not going on LinkedIn. We're not using Facebook, these things. Like, this is our community and we're getting incentivized for it. For being a part of it. And we're able to take the value that we've created by creating value for the community to buy goods and services that would value our student or that would benefit our students.
Yeah, I feel like the equivalent I want to make for people, maybe help drive this home, and you can correct me if this is not an accurate analogy, but I think of like international educators kind of thinking like influencers. When you think, if you're over on Instagram and you follow somebody and they're like, try this great shampoo or whatever, I don't know. And they're like influencing you, and because they are like, I've used this for 6 months, my hair is so long and luscious, whatever. They're in a process of saying, I have this expertise and this experience, I'm going to recommend this thing to you. I think in a similar realm outside of like consumer goods, there is something about when we're contributing our thought leadership, our expertise, our skills to the field, that there could be an ecosystem where we get a return on that intellectual investment. So if you've ever presented at NAFSA or forum or a regional or done an online workshop of some kind, if you think about all those contributions to the field you've done over the course of your career, if every time you were earning some clout, if you will, outside of just people knowing your name, but like something that was I'm going to say tangible, but not tangible,
Right, right,
digitally
right.
tangible, I guess.
Digitally tangible, for sure, for sure.
Then this could, one, have an upside for you, but also I think there is something, because I work with a lot of, at Inside Study Abroad, people are trying to break into the professional world of international education. So they want to
Yeah.
be an administrator, or they want to work for a place like Class2Class. Well, it can be very challenging to break into those virtual rooms and to get any kind of attention, or to showcase your skills, your talents, experience, et cetera. And so if I, as a newbie, could equally come into this space and contribute and, gain some traction and notoriety, or tokens, if you will, the same amount as me, who's been in the field for 20 years, and we're kind of on equal playing field, that it gets more ideas, more people's perspectives shown, whereas I might be like unconsciously favored because people recognize my name. Whereas,
Right.
does that make sense? Like, where
Absolutely.
it kind of democratizes just our ability to contribute as professionals, instead of like, well, you've had all these fancy titles, worked at all these fancy places, so we're like, you're defaulted into being the
Yep.
innovative person. Whereas there might be people who you've never heard of, who actually have some innovative ideas, but they don't have the other notations of clout that we have in every profession, like titles and things like that. So I think that's really exciting. I think if you've ever been frustrated that you had to pay to go to NAFSA and you were presenting and this whole thing and you weren't compensated, this
Right.
could, like, this is
Right.
one of those situations where you're
You're
like,
nailing it.
oh, I could actually be compensated for my expertise, which is outside of my regular role. So that's exciting.
And that's no, I think you absolutely hit on it. And that's what excites me the most about this whole Web 3.0, evolution, right? Because it is an evolution. It's just making the internet that we had before a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that we're putting the power back into the people. We're
Mm-hmm.
democratizing it. And we're allowing people, like, if I create value, I should earn currency. I should earn money, right? So, I mean, imagine a world where, like, you use Facebook, Instagram, and all this stuff every day. They make billions from you. Imagine logging in, and when you post pictures and stuff, they give you a little bit. Like, thanks, you're making our community better. You're making
Right.
people want to log in.
Mm-hmm.
You could earn passive money that way, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, think of the evolution that happened even in Web 2.0 with physical assets. You had Uber, right, who took a liability, a car. The minute you take it off the lot, it loses value. Now you've turned it into an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can drive it around and make money from it.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, you buy a lawnmower for $200 and it was a sunk cost, that you used once every 4 weeks. Now you, through some platforms, you can rent it out and make money from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, this is the future of business, in my opinion, is partnerships, cooperation, creating things where it's more not only in the digital space, but it's automated, right? We're removing human beings from messing up the system, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it benefits the whole. And like you said, for the creators, it's like, how do we take things that you're already doing? You're not making money from posting all of your content and doing your webinars and doing your talks and stuff. How do we make money from that? And we can, through these new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
We just need people to come together and want to kind of create this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've been not monetizing, like Inside Study Abroad. You can still monetize right now without needing blockchain technically. Like, I take transactions over the internet all the time, but there is the issue of, like, it goes through Stripe and then to my bank account, et cetera. There is that delay component. One of the things, I guess, we're going way over, so I apologize. And there is a question that I want to get to in just a second, but what it makes me start thinking about is the extreme of this that might be a challenge or a critique even, is you mentioned the Ubers and the gig economy, basically.
Yeah, right.
Of renting out your lawnmower, for instance, or just even in our field of, like, trying to be compensated for every contribution and that we make, is that it kind of pushes us to this, like extreme of, like, hustle culture of, like, if you
Right,
want to make
right.
a viable, comfortable living in your profession, that you're going to have to earn every single tiny transaction. Whereas the concept of, like, oh, salaried roles and sort of and they're not all great salaries in our field either, but it's sort of that umbrella compensation for your broad
Yeah.
contribution. And I'd hate for our field to, like, move in the direction of we're all just, like,
Yeah,
hustling,
that's not the goal
12-hour
either,
days to
right?
like make
Yeah.
ends meet,
I
to like,
posted more
like
content. I should, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Well,
make more
and I
money.
think,
Yeah.
I have a couple of YouTube channels, and, full disclosure, it has that model of, if I post a video and the more views it gets, and depending on the subject matter of the video, as it's a complicated
Right. Right.
algorithm basically, but I can earn a living. So I make anywhere from, and it varies, 300, I can't earn a living, let's be clear, $300 to
Right.
$500 a month in ad revenue. That just happens. Like, I don't have to
Nice.
transact that. So YouTube is like one of those kinds of platforms that does share their revenue with the creators on the platform, as once they hit a certain threshold. And TikTok has their creator fund, which is
Mhm.
like, but they're paying pennies on the dollar to
Right.
creators
Right.
for their contribution, as well as Instagram. They also have a creator fund situation that I've been in on that as well. And it's like, here's $4. So
Yeah. Right.
I'm not like a million. I don't have a million followers by any
For
stretch.
sure.
So, but still, there are these little hints of it, but it's still very capped and it's very limited.
Yeah.
And it's not at all tracking with the level of contribution or impact, if you will, or engagement. So it does exist, but it's just still not as egalitarian, if you will.
And I think that that's a very great point, and you're absolutely right. I think one of the key things that you've hit on, though, is all of these platforms are trying to transition to some degree on how do we, like, oh, we've been exploiting people for far too long, maybe we can
Yes.
give them a little bit of money.
Yeah.
But this is the beginning of this kind of Web 3.0, right? And these different technologies, which everyone is, probably, heard a ton about, but it's still very much kind of the beginning stages.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I know we brought up in a conversation last time we had is like how unequitable it really is right now, right? A whole
Mhm.
bunch of rich white people who have been in the tech space are kind of at the forefront of it.
Mhm.
The other 96% of people are just like, people are selling pictures of apes on the internet and random, pictures of themselves and making $3 million, and I'm driving to work in rush hour traffic. I'm pretty frustrated. I don't really want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to have more of these discussions to kind of, how do we take this technology and how do we make it more equitable? How do we implement it correctly? How do we put in the guardrails, if you will, to make sure that the scenario you just, referred to doesn't happen? No one
Mhm.
wants to create that world, right?
Mhm.
But it's still unfolding. So this is why we need people in this space to know about it, to be aware of it, so they can work together to create these, very equitable, democratized, and fundamentally better, internet environments that exist today. Not only for, ourselves, right, the administrators and the vendors and stuff, but for the students, right? This is why we're doing it, right?
Mhm.
How do we create a better kind of international education space?
Mhm.
So yeah, I can't answer your question, right? I think you're onto something, though. It will go that way if it's not discussed, and if we
Mhm.
allow other people to kind of dictate, right,
Mhm.
how that should unfold. So that's why
Mhm.
people in this space really need to know what these technologies are and the impact, so they can kind of think forward, how do we build out,
Mhm.
these better communities online.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because it kind of reminds me of, like, I'm coming back to like my poli-sci days, but it's like the purest form of capitalism or communism or anything in between on paper is mathematically beautiful, but the actual implementation on human society and emotion and like all the things that we bring as human beings to these ideas, none of them, one, exist purely in the world, and two, when we try to get closer to them, our humanity, our human flaws, like, exacerbate the challenges. I think that's kind of similar with this, is that,
Mhm.
it's like, we think about Uber, like all the issues around the country and the world with unequitable working conditions
Yeah.
and compensation and access to benefits, things like that, that on the surface, the gig economy sounds really great, right? Like, my car's an asset now. It's
Yeah.
like the top line benefit.
Cool.
But then when
Yeah.
you get down to like the granular level things, that it doesn't always flesh out in like the most equitable way. I think that this is, like you said, it's like, it's so new. And what the opportunity though to contribute to how it unfolds, I think
Mhm.
is exciting. And because it's distributed, like if you even think about, sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but I was around when forums first started.
Yeah.
And the idea of forum on education abroad, love it. Went to the conference. I'm not saying anything negative about it, but it was started by a core group of people who were like, you know what, we need just more focused content on education abroad that, NAFSA just isn't touching on. And it started with a very pure, beautiful idea, but it sprung from a very set group of people. It was kind of a very, closed door room, if you will, and they
Yeah.
started the evolution. And of course they have committees and lots of contribution opportunities now, but it really started at in a closed group. And it sounds like this is as the opportunity of, in theory, at least, to be more open in terms of that
Absolutely.
contribution to how it can unfold, which is exciting, right?
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I think what you've hit on is spot on, right? And that's the fact that like every idea, right, when it's first starting off and has no kind of, application is like a utopia. It's
Hmm.
like, can you imagine a system where it tracks everything and automates it? We can remove human beings so we can send money and do transactions immediately. Like it, let's take a sales example, right? Salespeople, if they do a sale and they earn commission, like the business has to take time, and then maybe they send them a check a few weeks later. It's like we could set up rules where it's instantaneous, right?
Yeah.
We could remove human beings from the equation. It
Yeah.
sounds great, right?
Yeah.
Creating these distributed organizations where everyone can contribute in these massive ecosystems where it's fair and
Mhm.
people are making money off of the things that they've created. You're absolutely right. It sounds amazing. But at the end of the day, human beings are involved and we have to work together to kind of create those ideal scenarios, situations, companies, organizations, what have you. But this technology, I think, makes it just a little bit easier to do that than what we had previously through Web
Mhm.
2.0. And that's exciting to me. But as you mentioned, yeah, we need to get smarter people than me involved and excited about this and working together from multiple different kind of backgrounds
Mhm.
in organizations to make sure that we build something
Mhm.
truly unique and
Mhm.
valuable.
Yeah. I just want to, because we did have some audience participation
Of
here.
course.
So Paula,
Okay.
she said, don't ask my other question, but she says also that dark money and funding terrorism are often brought up or cited as potential problems with cryptocurrency because they're untraceable. And I'm confused on that. I thought the whole idea was that it would be traceable because it has that key attached to that says this is where the money originated from and it could be tracked.
Yeah, through NFTs, that's definitely the case. But I mean, this is a problem. No one really knows how to solve it or if it's even solvable. But when you remove a government or a central organization from controlling your money,
Mm,
like the value is you don't have a government telling you where and how to spend and send
mm,
your money. The negative is you can spend and share your money however you want,
right. Well, and
right?
I think I
So
heard that that's also a situation that they're thinking that Russia might be trying to
right,
circumvent
but
funds
we'll
through
we'll take the
the,
reverse. We'll
yeah.
take the reverse. A whole bunch of money, $50 million in Bitcoin got sent to Ukraine, right?
Mm,
And that would have been like it wasn't a government entity that was receiving that money, which Russia could have gotten upset about or could have
mm,
stopped. The US couldn't have stopped it. It was people sitting everywhere around the world going, I want to send my money to Ukraine, so I'm going to do it. And they were
mm,
able to do it, right? They
mm,
didn't have to, no sort of regulations, if you will, saying you couldn't. But the negative is a whole bunch of Russians can be getting their money out of Russia through Bitcoin and other sorts of things, and the sanctions don't matter.
mhm.
Yeah, so we
Yeah,
created a technology where both cases I think have to exist. I don't know how to solve it. I don't know if
right,
others do,
right.
but
Well,
would
I
you
think it,
rather a world
good.
where you can send your money and do that and have more power and autonomy, but also allow other shady actors to do the same, or
Mhm,
just trust governments implicitly and say, you take care of my money, you know what you're doing. I don't want
mhm.
to have that ability to do
Yeah.
so. I don't know.
Well, and it kind of it makes me think of like free speech, right? Where it's like if you want free speech and all the amazing things that come with it, you're also going to have to probably listen to somebody that makes your blood boil, also say things you do not agree with, and that's the price of the right for
Free
yourself.
speech.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I agree.
I mean, obviously that's a whole other thing. I do want
Right.
to wrap it up because we have gone almost an hour, and I apologize to everyone. Thank you so much. But I haven't read through the whole comment yet. But Gordon wrote in that he, above all else, this has been a brilliant hour. Thank you so much, Gordon, because I was very nervous about this topic,
Appreciate you,
talking
Gordon.
about it. So my question is something I assume you've surmounted, and so not criticism in the least, but maybe on the minds of others, on the consumer end of Web 3.0.
Yeah.
With the gigification of international ed, is there a means of knowing what's worth using / buying? Right. So it's like, is it legit, or are you getting a knockoff or something? Right. Like if there's an equivalent. Right. So if you have commodified my every keystroke and valued it by some wildly fluctuating token, even what costs more might not signify quality, quantity, or previous uses. Users could be false. First, last might not suggest quality content, reviews, bots, etc. And I don't know that anyone could find an objective reference recommendations among the noise. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a challenge, I would say, with 2.0. Even if you look at Amazon reviews, that's like an area that is not in the crypto world at all, but like you have to be very weary of buying projects and relying on some reviews, because they can just like stuff the reviews with bots.
For sure.
And that's the same. Yeah.
I think with Web 3.0, it's a little bit better. It's not where it should be or where it could be. But for example, let's say you create and I'll try to keep this quick. You create a lesson, right? You value it. Let's say it's 25 i.e. dollars or what have you, coins. It makes things on the blockchain more transparent. So I can see all the people who have purchased it. I can see where they're using it, right? And maybe the different courses. I can see how it's being used. So we can gather more data through the blockchain on usability, access, data on whether maybe there's an assessment component to it. So we can have that kind of attached to the lesson. So creating a way in which those kind of ones that are being used more often and have better metrics or data, what have you, however we want to classify that, rise to the top. In terms of bots, I mean, Web 2.0, you log in with like an email and stuff, and you can create bots that create emails and everything else. Through this, if you're given like a unique identifier and it tracks you, I don't know as much, but I was talking to one of my buddies who's an expert, kind of have his own crypto training company, if you will, in Spain. And he was telling me that, for platforms, we can limit the amount of bots that get on through this certain tracking. I don't know enough to give you an expert example. All I know is that he mentioned this in our conversation. So I was like, okay, I got to dive into that more. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's not where it should be. There's still going to be complications. I think it's a little bit better than Web 2.0, but it's not, right. It's still going to be issues around that, right? It's a good question.
Yeah. And I think there is something too that just like we use credibility triggers, social proof triggers, in outside of the crypto blockchain ecosystem now, where, I have a program on helping people launch a career in international ed. I have lots of social proof elements that would make it seem like, okay, maybe she knows what she's talking about, versus somebody who just came home from studying abroad yesterday and is like, I'm going to do it. Like they might not have some of those credibility triggers. And then after the fact, I think then it's like somebody might buy something once, but then they're going to probably tell their ecosystem or tell the network, like,
if it's connected well enough, don't buy this, right?
Maybe, not great. Yeah. And so, but I think you're right. And Gordon, I think you bring up a really good point, because there's a lot of crap out there. I mean, even if you go to Amazon, if you want to look up a book on any subject matter, there's going to be amazing books that are just so amazing, well written, et cetera. And then there's going to be people who are like wrote an ebook over the weekend and loaded it to Amazon and everything in between. So you're absolutely right. And I think that's a challenge to tackle for another time. With that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. This was so fun, Matt. I feel smarter,
Yeah, I
at
really
least a
appreciate
little
you.
bit.
Yeah.
And you did a great job of explaining, especially I think the evolution of how we got to this world of crypto, Web3, if you will. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And those of you who
No,
left your
thanks
comments
everyone.
and questions, these are really, really good. I think we had one person on here that said they were a 5. So I'll be
Oh,
waiting for their critique on this
oh,
as
I'm
well.
waiting for their critique as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And so thank you everyone. And thank you Class to Class for sponsoring this episode. And if you
of
want to
course.
learn more about Class to Class and how they're facilitating virtual exchange, across universities and professors and classrooms, obviously, you could just go to class2class.com. And of course, Matt told me that you can reach out to him on LinkedIn, and he wants to chat all things crypto with you. He's really excited about it. So let him know over on LinkedIn. And of course, I have to let you all know, please join us on our next episode on May 4th. I'm going to be talking with Professor Brian Schuler of Hillsborough Community College. Community colleges are going to be representing,
Whoop, whoop.
and we're going to be talking actually about a virtual exchange and different innovative approaches he's been using in his
Ooh, cool.
classrooms to bring digital global experiences to his students. So thank you all for being here,
Mhm.
and we will see you next time. Bye,
Yeah,
everybody.
I appreciate you, Brooke. Bye, guys.